Most families argue about politics at Thanksgiving. My family argued about me, specifically about how little I'd accomplished, how I still rented, how my sister had done everything right, and I had done everything wrong. My dad said it loud enough for everyone to hear. 14 people at that table, and not one of them spoke up. That's fine. I didn't need them to, because the thing about being underestimated your whole life is this: nobody checks what's in your hands until it's too late. Welcome back, drama story. Pour yourself something warm, settle in, and remember, every person in this story had a chance to behave. They just chose wrong. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. You're going to want to stay for this one. The morning of Thanksgiving, I stood in my kitchen and did what I always do before seeing my family. I closed my laptop. The spreadsheet on the screen showed November's rental income across 4 buildings. 24 units, all paid. I didn't need to look at the numbers anymore, but it checked them every night the way some people check their locks. Old habit. Comforting. I wrapped the sweet potato casserole in foil. My grandmother's recipe. Brown butter and pecans. A pinch of cayenne that nobody ever guessed. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon and caramel, and the late November sun came through the window at that low angle that turns everything the color of honey. My condo was quiet, clean, nothing fancy. A gray couch, bookshelves that actually had books, a kitchen table where I ate dinner every night. If ya walked in, you'd think a school teacher lived here, maybe an accountant. You wouldn't think the woman who owned this unit also owned the building across town, the one with the blue awning and the cracked mailbox in the lobby, but we'll get to that. I grabbed my keys off the counter. Honda CR-V, 8 years old, still ran fine. I tucked the casserole under one arm, checked my reflection in the hall mirror, simple sweater, jeans, hair pulled back, and locked the door behind me. Every Thanksgiving, I told myself the same thing. This year would be different. This year, my father would ask how I was doing and actually wait for the answer. This year, my mother would say my name without following it with my sister's. Every year, I was wrong. I grabbed my keys, my casserole, and what was left of my patience. It wouldn't be enough. And if you've ever been the one nobody asks about at the dinner table, you already know what I'm about to say. In the Everett family, there were 2 kinds of daughters. Theana, my father talked about, and the one he talked over. Paige was 3 years younger, but she was always introduced first at church picnics, at my uncle's barbecue, at every family gathering since I could remember. This is Paige. She's pre-med, then a pause. And this is Enid. No qualifier, no verb, just my name hanging in the air like a coat nobody wanted to claim. My father, Harold, had a system. He'd ask Paige, "What have you accomplished this month?" Voice warm, proud, leaning forward in High's chair. Then he'd turn to me. "Have you found a job yet?" Even when I had a job, even when I'd had the same job for 3 years, my mother, Judith, can never corrected him. She just nodded. Judith Everett could nod through an earthquake. She nodded when Harold hung Paige's graduation photo in the living room. The big frame, center wall, brass hook. She nodded when he put mine in the desk drawer. "We'll find a spot for it," she said. That was 11 years ago. The drawer still hasn't opened. I remember the smell of Harold's Old Spice cologne soaking into the sofa cushions, the tick of the grandfather clock on the mantel, the way our living room always felt 5 degrees too warm because Harold kept the thermostat at 74 and nobody was allowed to touch it. I wasn't always quiet. There was a time I tried to speak up. That's when I learned the rule. Let me tell you something about families that play favorites. The favorite never knows they're being used as a weapon. And the target never forgets. I bought my first building at 25. It had 2 units, 1 leaking roof, and 0 approval from my father. It was a duplex on Maple Court, tired siding, a front porch that sagged in the middle, and a yard full of dandelions that the neighbors pretended not to see. I used an FHA loan, put down everything I'd saved since college, and moved into the left unit. The right unit I rented to a retired postal worker named Dolers, who paid on time every month and left cookies on my doorstep at Christmas. I told Harold at Sunday dinner I was proud. 25 first property, signed the papers myself. He put his fork down. A duplex. He said it the way you'd say a rash. That's not a real house, Enid. That's a starter for people who can't afford a real house. I didn't argue. I went home that night, changed into work clothes, and spent 3 hours fixing the bathroom faucet in Dolar's unit. The wrench kept slipping. My knuckles bled twice, and the smell of fresh pipe sealant burned my nostrils. But when the water ran clean and the drip stopped, I sat on the bathroom floor and listened to silence. Silence I owned. The first rent check Dolar's handed me was $1,200. I didn't frame it, but I kept the stub in a cigar box on my dresser. Not because of the money, because it was proof that something I'd built with my own hands had value. Even if the only person who believed that was a 70-year-old woman with a cookie habit, I didn't need my father to understand cap rates or cash-on-cash returns. I just needed him to stop talking long enough for me to work. That first rent check was $1,200. By the time I was 30, there would be a lot more. The last time I told my family about my properties was 11 years ago. Let me tell you why it was the last time. I was 27. I just closed on a fourplex on Birch Street. 4 units, solid bones, tenants already in place. I was excited the way you're excited when you've been digging for years and finally hit something solid. So I brought it up at dinner. I bought an author building, I said, casual like it was nothing. Harold set his glass down. Who's backing you? Nobody. It's mine. You can't do this alone, Enid. Judith chimed in before I could answer. Maybe you should help Paige buy her first house instead of collecting rent from strangers. Paige, sitting across the table, smiled into her wine. After dinner, and I was carrying plates to the kitchen when I heard Paige whispering to our cousin Megan in the hallway. She probably has some guy bankrolling her. You know, Enid, she's never done anything on her own. I heard it, every word. The plates in my hands didn't shake, but something inside me did. I drove home in the rain that night, sat in the parking lot of my fourplex for 20 minutes, watched the water run down the windshield, street light turning every droplet the color of weak tea. The wipers were off. I just sat there and I made a decision. I would never tell them again. Not out of shame, not out of secrecy, for secrecy's sake. Because sharing my success with this family was like handing someone a gift and watching them use it to hit you. People think silence is weakness, and they've never watched a quiet woman build an empire while everyone around her was too busy talking to notice. I sat in that parking lot for 20 minutes, and when I finally drove home, I made a decision that would change everything. I would never tell them again. Burwood Property Group. That's the name on the lease. Not Enid Everett, not Dad's Disappointment LLC. I filed the paperwork on a Tuesday afternoon in March, sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of black coffee and a laptop full of bookmarks to the Secretary of State's website. The name came from the birch trees on the street where I bought the fourplex. Nothing personal, nothing traceable. That was the point. I hired Sterling Management to handle the day-to-day tenant calls, maintenance requests, rent collection. My name didn't appear on any mailbox, any sign, any invoice. If you rented from Burwood, you dealt with Sterling. If you dealt with Sterling, you never heard the name Everett. Over the next 8 years, I bought 2 more buildings, a 6-unit on Orchard Lane, an 8-unit on Franklin. Every purchase funded by the last one. Rent profits rolled into down payments, repairs paid from reserves, no family money, no favors, no co-signers, just math and patience. By 35, I had 24 tenants. I managed everything from an app on my phone, a dashboard that tracked rent payments, maintenance tickets, lease renewals. Every night at 10, the phone glowed blue in my dark bedroom with a quiet ping. Daily summary, units collected, outstanding balances. My life on the outside looked the same. Honda CR-V, clothes from Target, sweet potato casserole at Thanksgiving. And I didn't wear the money because the money wasn't the point. The point was the buildings. The point was knowing that every month 24 families came home to something I'd built. By 35, I had 24 tenants. One of them. Starting 3 years ago was my father. He just didn't know it yet. But that part of the story, how Harold Everett ended up renting from his own daughter, that deserves its own chapter. 3 years ago, my father did something he swore he'd never do. He rented. Harold had been a construction site manager for 29 years. He wore steel-toed boots to dinner sometimes, talked about load-bearing walls the way other men talked about football. He owned his house for 30 years. A colonial on Ridgemont with a flagpole in the front yard and a mortgage he almost never mentioned. Then the company restructured. Harold was 61. They called it early retirement. He called it that too to everyone who asked. But I saw the severance paperwork on Judith's counter one Sunday. The edges torn where he'd ripped open the envelope too fast. The number on it was not a number that said, "We value your service." It was a number that said, "Please leave quietly." They couldn't keep the house. The mortgage was still alive, and Harold's pride wouldn't let him admit the math didn't work anymore. They sold. Judith found a listing for a 2-bedroom apartment in a well-maintained building on Cedar Street. Clean lobby, decent parking, managed by Sterling Property Services. Sterling worked for me. The notification popped up on my phone at 9:47 on a Wednesday morning. New application, Harold and Judith Everett, Unit 4B. I stared at it for 5 minutes. Then I set the phone down and let the system do what systems do. Application reviewed, credit checked, lease signed, no intervention, not discount, market rate, $1,850 a month. Every month after that, Harold signed a check to Sterling Property Services. Sterling deposited it into Burwood's operating account. Burwood was mine. In my experience, the people who shame others for renting are always the ones most terrified of becoming renters themselves. And every month since then, his rent check has gone into an account with my name on it. He signs it, Harold Everett. I deposit it as Burwood Property Group. Some of you know this feeling. The moment you realize your father doesn't dislike you because of what you've done, he dislikes you because of what he hasn't. Paige owned 3 houses. That's what Harold told everyone at church, at the hardware store, at Uncle Gene's 4th of July cookout. Paige is a property investor. He said it with the same voice he used to say. Paige is pre-med 20 years earlier. Different vocabulary, same glow. What he never mentioned was the down payment. $120,000. Harold gave it to Paige when she was 28. Pulled from the Ridgemont house equitype for things went sideways. An investment in her future, he called it. He never offered me a cent. When I asked once, only once, he said, "You chose a different path, Enid." Paige used the money to buy a 3-bedroom ranch in Glenview. Then she leveraged it into 2 more adjustable-rate mortgages, both of them stretched thin as old rubber bands. Then her Instagram showed open-concept kitchens and champagne brunches. Her LinkedIn said real estate investor and entrepreneur. She called herself a property mogul at dinner parties. Brett, her husband, was a different story. Brett was the kind of quiet that comes from swallowing things you can't afford to say. He'd sit at family gatherings nursing his whiskey, staring at a spot on the wall like it owed him money. I noticed nobody else did. Paige's FaceTime ringtone chirped every Sunday afternoon. Harold checking in. They'd talk for 40 minutes. He never called me on Sundays. He never called me at all. So when I pulled into my parents' apartment complex that Thanksgiving morning, my apartment complex, I already knew what was coming. I just didn't know how far he'd go. I walked into Unit 4B carrying a casserole and a decade of silence. The apartment smelled like roasting turkey and the cheap lavender air freshener Judith bought in bulk from the dollar store. 14 people were already there. Harold at the head of the table. Judith shuttling between the kitchen and the dining room with a serving spoon in each hand. Paige and Brett on the left side. Brett already on his second whiskey. Aunt Ruth and Uncle Gene by the window. 3 cousins, Derek with his wife, Megan on her phone, Tyler with a girlfriend I hadn't met. Harold looked up when I walked in. "Nice of you to show up. Paige has been here since morning helping your mother." I set the casserole on the counter. "Traffic," I said. Even though there wasn't any, we sat. The table was too long for the apartment. Harold had kept the old dining table from Ridgemont, crammed it into a room that couldn't hold it, chairs wedged tight. I took the seat at the far end, the one next to the kitchen door. The spot that had been mine since I was old enough to sit in a real chair. Grace was short. The carving was loud. Harold sawed through the turkey like he was settling a score. Plates passed, forks scraped. Harold turned to Paige first. Tell everyone about the new property. Paige launched in. Permits, square footage, neighborhood upside. Harold nodded along, beaming. Then he turned to me. The fluorescent kitchen light buzzed above us, and I could hear the knife and fork clinking on every plate in the sudden quiet. Still renting, he said it the way you'd ask someone if they were still sick. And every head at that table turned to look at me. If you've made it this far, you already know this isn't just my story. It's yours, too. If this hits close to home, tap that subscribe button. It costs nothing, and it means everything. Now, let me tell you what my father said next, because it gets worse. My father has never met a dinner he couldn't ruin or a compliment he couldn't redirect to Paige. Still renting was just the opening act. Harold set his knife down. He looked at me the way a foreman looks at a crooked wall. Then he leaned back and his voice got louder. The voice he used when he wanted the whole room to hear, not just me. Your sister owns 3 homes, Enid. 3. She's 35 and she's built something. You're 38 and you've got what? A 1-bedroom somewhere. 2-bedroom, I said. He waved it off. You're the embarrassment of this family. The word landed on the table like a slap. Cousin Derek looked at his wife. Megan stared at her plate. Brett took a long pull of whiskey. 2 gulps, no pause. Judith stood up and started clearing dishes that didn't need clearing. Her hands moved fast, stacking plates, folding napkins, displacement labor. She'd been doing it my whole life. Harold wasn't finished. No husband, no house, no investments. He ticked them off on his fingers like Ammon counting change. 38 years old and nothing to show for it. Aunt Ruth's hand tightened around her wine glass. Uncle Gene coughed, quiet and deliberate, but nobody spoke. I cut a piece of turkey, chewed it slowly. The meat was dry. Judith always overcooked the breast, and the gravy had gone lukewarm, and I could feel Harold watching me, waiting for a reaction. I gave him nothing. The table was quiet enough to hear the plates rattle when Harold's palm came down flat on the wood. Water trembled in Everglass. The ice in Brett's whiskey shifted and clink-hegged. And then he said the one thing I'd been waiting 38 years to hear him say out loud. Not because I wanted it, but because I needed everyone else to hear it, too. What my father said next, he said with the confidence of a man who believes he still holds all the cards. I've been thinking about this for a while. Harold straightened in his chair, chest forward, chin up. The posture of a man giving a speech at a podium that doesn't exist. I'm putting Tozer the paperwork to leave everything to Paige. She's earned it. He turned to me. And I think it's time you sign something acknowledging that the room went cold, not the temperature. The air itself seemed to pull back from the table. I want to pause here because you need to understand what everything meant. Harold Everett had sold his house. He was renting an apartment on a retiree Social Security check, and whatever savings hadn't been drained by 30 years of keeping up appearances. His legacy was worth less than 3 months of my rental income. But he stood there at the head of a table he couldn't afford in an apartment he didn't own, announcing an inheritance that barely existed, and he expected me to sign it away. Paige shifted in her seat. Dad, that's not necessary. She said it softly, like a woman who wanted credit for objecting without actually objecting. Aunt Ruth leaned forward. Harold, this isn't the time. Ruth, stay out of it. He didn't even look at her. The ice in Tyler's girlfriend's glass cracked. A clean, sharp sound. Nobody else moved. In my experience, the men who talk loudest about their legacy are the ones with the least to leave behind. He wanted me to sign away my inheritance at the Thanksgiving dinner table. The inheritance, I should mention, was worth less than 3 months of my rental income. I looked around the table. 14 people. Not one of them was going to say a word. Cousin Derek had his hand on his wife's knee under the table. I could see his arm moving. A small squeeze that said, "Don't." Megan had her phone in her lap, thumbs frozen mid-scroll. Tyler's girlfriend. I still didn't know her name, was studying the cranberry sauce like it contained the answer to a question nobody had asked. Brett poured himself another whiskey. 3rd glass. His jaw was tight, the muscles in his cheek working like he was chewing on a sentence he couldn't swallow. Aunt Ruth sat back in her chair, arms crossed now, her wine untouched. She was watching me, and I could feel her eyes the way you feel heat from an open oven. Steady, close, waiting. Uncle Gene looked at his plate, then at Harold, then at his plate again. He opened his mouth, closed it, and picked up his fork. And Judith. Judith was in the kitchen now, running water she didn't need to run, wiping a counter that was already clean. Somewhere in the oven, the pumpkin pie had been forgotten, and the faintest smell of burnt sugar drifted through the kitchen doorway. Caramelized edges turning to char while nobody was paying attention. The timer had gone off 10 minutes ago. She didn't hear it. A country song played low from the kitchen radio. Something about going home. The irony wasn't lost on me. I put my fork down. I folded my hands on the table and I waited. That's when my phone buzzed, and everything after that happened because I made one very small decision. There's a sound that changes everything. Sometimes it's a door slamming. Sometimes it's a phone buzzing on a wooden table. My phone vibrated against the oak. A low, insistent hum like a bee trapped under glass. Sterling Management app. Monthly rent collection summary. All units, all buildings. November. I glanced at the screen. Quick. And the way you check a watch during a conversation you're not enjoying. I saw enough. The dashboard, the green check marks, the dollar figures. Then I set the phone face down on the table and went back to my turkey. Harold watched me do it. At least have the decency to be present, he said. Put the phone away. Then he paused. His eyes moved to the phone. Actually, give it to me. He reached across, picked it up before I could react. Not that I was going to react. He grabbed it the way he used to take toys from my hands when I was 6, without asking, without thinking, because everything in his house was his to examine. Except this wasn't his house. I didn't lunge for it. I didn't raise my voice. I sat back, set both hands flat on the table, and waited. Ruth was watching. Brett was watching. Even Megan looked up from her lap. Harold held my phone the way a man holds a thing he expects to be ordinary. The screen glowed up against his chin, casting a thin blue-white light across the lines of his jaw. My father picked up my phone, and I watched his face the way you watch a kettle right before it boils. What happened next took exactly 11 seconds. I counted. Let me tell you something about families that keep score. The scoreboard is always rigged. 5 years before that Thanksgiving, I gave my mother one last chance to see me. I took Judith to lunch at a cafe downtown, the one with the checkered tablecloths and the espresso machine that hissed like a radiator. I ordered a latte. She ordered tea. We sat near the window where the sunlight hit the table in a clean square. I'm doing well, Mom, I said. Careful, testing the water financially, I mean. And really well. Judith stirred her tea. The spoon clink-egged against the ceramic, 3 slow circles. Then she looked up and smiled. That's nice, honey. Paige just closed on her second house. Your father is so proud. She didn't ask how. She didn't ask how much. She redirected the conversation to Paige the way a highway exit redirects traffic. Smooth, automatic, no thought required. I sat there holding my latte, watching the foam dissolve into the coffee, and I understood something I should have understood years earlier. Sharing my life with this family was like mailing letters to an address that doesn't exist. The effort was real. The delivery was impossible, so I stopped mailing. I finished my latte. We talked about the weather. I drove home and opened my laptop and reviewed the quarterly reports for all 4 buildings and didn't cry. And didn't call anyone and didn't need to. Back at the Thanksgiving table, the one in my own building, I watched Harold hold my phone and I felt something settle inside me like sediment in still water. I hadn't shown him. He had taken it himself. So no, I didn't tell my father the truth. He found it himself. And that, I promise you, is worse. My father read fast, but that night he read very, very slowly. The Sterling Management dashboard was clean. White background, green sidebar at the top, Burwood Property Group, monthly collection summary, November. I know what he saw because I see it every night. A list, neat rows. Each one a unit, a tenant name, a dollar amount, a status. Unit 1A, Martinez, $1,750 paid. Unit 2C, Kowalski, $1,900 paid. Unit 3, A. Henderson, $1,700 paid. His thumb moved down the screen, scrolling slow, his eyes narrowing the way they did when he used to read blueprints, following lines, looking for the mistake. Unit 4, B. Everett, H&J, $1,850. Paid. His thumb stopped. I watched his eyes travel from the name to the amount to the address. The address of the building he was sitting in, the apartment he was sitting in, his name on a rent roll listed between Henderson and a couple in 5A whose last name he'd never bothered to learn. Then his eyes moved up to the top of the page to the header he'd skimmed past on the way down. Owner, Burwood Property Group, LLC. Primary contact, E. Everett. IT. His breathing changed. Shorter, heavier. The phone tilted in his hand just slightly anan the way a glass tilts before it falls. A fork clattered onto a plate somewhere down the table. Megan's maybe or Tyler's. The sound was sharp enough to cut the silence, but nobody flinched. Harold looked up from the phone. He looked at me, and for the first time in 38 years, Harold Everett had absolutely nothing to say. Silence in the Everett family is rare. That night it was deafening. Harold set the phone on the table. His hand trembled just enough to make the phone click twice against the wood. Click, click, like a door latch that won't catch. Dad, Paige leaned forward. What's wrong? Harold didn't answer. Harold. Judith had stopped wiping the counter. She stood in the kitchen doorway, dish towel over her shoulder, hands still wet. Nothing. The grandfather clock, the one Harold had brought from Ridgemont and the one thing he refused to sell, ticked from the living room. Tick, tick, tick. Before tonight, I'd never noticed it in this apartment. Now it was the only sound in the world. Aunt Ruth uncrossed her arms. She looked at the phone on the table, then at Harold's face, then at me. Something moved behind her eyes. Not surprise, exactly. Recognition, the look of a woman who'd been waiting for a shoe to drop and just heard it land. Uncle Gene put his fork down quietly, deliberately, like a man placing a bet. I reached across the table, picked up my phone, slid it into my jacket pocket. Then I folded my napkin, set it beside my plate, and smoothed a wrinkle that wasn't there. 14 people, all of them watching Harold. For 38 years, he'd been the one who watched, the one who judged. If the one who decided who mattered and who didn't, now every pair of eyes at that table was pointed at him, and he had nowhere to look. Paige asked again, Dad, what did you see? And I, for the first time all evening, smiled. You looked through my phone, Dad. I didn't show you. You looked. My father tried to dismiss it. Of course he did. Harold Everett doesn't lose arguments, he just talks louder. This doesn't mean anything. His voice was gravel, rough at the edges. Anyone can set up an LLC. Anyone can make a screen look like whatever they want. I didn't argue. I didn't pull up bank statements or wave a deed in his face. I just turned to Judith, who was still standing in the kitchen doorway, dish towel dripping onto the linoleum. Mom, does the lobby door still stick in cold weather? I've been meaning to have Sterling send someone. The sentence was simple, casual, the kind of thing you'd say between bites of pie, but it landed on that table like a stone in a pond, and the ripples hit every chair. Because Judith knew exactly which door I was talking about. She fought with it every morning when she went to check the mail. She'd complained about it to Harold Twist last week. Judith looked at me, then at Harold, then down at the dish towel in her hands as if she'd just discovered she was holding it. Paige, wait. Paige's voice was sharp now. What are you talking about? What is she talking about? There is a kind of silence that belongs to people who just realize they've been wrong about everything. It sounds different from regular silence. It sounds like the floor is falling. Harold sat very still, and the fluorescent light above us buzzed and flickered. A loose ballast. I'd been meaning to have Sterling replace my building. My buzzing light. My father sitting underneath it. We're about to get to the part you've been waiting for. Before we do, only 3% of people who watch actually subscribe. If this story is speaking to you, tap that button. It takes 1 second and it means the world. You being here, that's not nothing. Okay, let's finish this. I stood up not because I was angry, because I was done sitting. Paige was demanding answers now. Her voice climbing the way it always did when she felt the spotlight shifting away from her. Derrick's wife whispered something. Tyler's girlfriend looked like she wanted to be anywhere else on Earth. Brett poured another whiskey and didn't look at anyone. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I own this building. Simple, flat, the way you'd read a street sign. Burwood Property Group is my company. I've owned this property for 3 years. Mom and Dad are tenants. They pay $1,850 a month and it goes into my account. Harold's jaw worked, but no words came. I also own 3 other buildings, 24 units total. I've been doing this for 13 years since I was 25. You're lying, Harold said. Check your lease, Dad. The management company is Sterling. They work for me. The table was so quiet. I could hear the heating vent clicking on, warm air pushing through the baseboard, the faint metallic smell of old dust burning off the coils. My building's heating system, the one I'd serviced in October. Harold's face moved through something I'd never seen before. Not anger. He had 100 faces for anger. This was different. This was the face of a man watching a wall he'd built for 38 years come apart brick by brick and realizing he'd been standing on the wrong side of it. I didn't build my life so my father could approve of it. I built it so I'd never need him to. Paige did what Paige always does when she feels the spotlight shifting. She made herself the victim. This is insane. She stood up, palms flat on the table, leaning forward like a prosecutor. You've been spying on them. You bought their building to control them. I folded my arms. I bought the building 2 years before they moved in, Paige. I didn't choose them as tenants. They applied through the management company. Yeah, they were approved the same way everyone else is. So you've been lying to all of us this entire time. Lying. I let the word sit for a second. I stopped telling you because the last time I tried, you told cousin Megan I had a sugar daddy. Megan, sitting at the far end of the table, choked on her water. The glass came down hard. She looked at Paige, then at me, then at the ceiling. Paige's face went the color of the cranberry sauce. Deep, uneven red. That was I was joking. Were you? Aunt Ruth, who had been quiet for 20 minutes, did something I'll remember for the rest of my life. She picked up her wine glass, took a slow sip, and set it down. That was it. No words. But the look on her face, chin slightly lifted, the smallest curve at the corner of her mouth, said more than a speech. Paige turned to Harold. Dad, I say something. Tell her she can't just, but Harold was staring at the table, at the wood grain, at the table he'd kept from the house he'd sold, sitting in the apartment he rented from the daughter he'd just called an embarrassment. And then Brett, her husband, the man who hadn't said a word all evening, did something unexpected. I didn't expect Brett to be the one to light the match. But then again, quiet men married to loud women tend to carry a lot of matches. Brett had been sitting in his chair like a man waiting for a bus he's already missed. 4 Weisses deep, jaw clenched, eyes fixed on a spot on the tablecloth that had soaked up a splash of gravy 20 minutes ago. He spoke quietly, almost gentle, but every word landed. 3 houses, Paige. He didn't look at her. He looked at his glass. Tell them the truth. You 2 of them are underwater. We haven't made a mortgage payment on the Elm Street one in 4 months. The table absorbed it the way dry ground absorbs rain. Slowly, then all at once. Brett, shut up. Paige's voice was a wire pulled tight. I'm done shutting up. Harold turned to Paige. What? Just the one word, but it carried 35 years of investment. Paige opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. It's a temporary cash flow situation. The market. Brett repeated. He almost laughed. The whiskey sloshed in his glass. The market didn't take out 3 adjustable rate mortgages with 6% down, Paige. The irony settled over the table like a fog. Harold had spent the entire evening humiliating the daughter who owned 24 units free and clear while celebrating the daughter who was drowning in debt she couldn't service. Aunt Ruth raised her wine glass. She didn't toast. She just sipped. Her eyes were bright, and I swore I saw the faintest shine at the edges. 2 secrets came out at that table. Mine was a fortune. Paige's was a ruin. And my father was the man who backed the wrong horse for 35 years. Harold Everett sat down, and the man who had spoken for 38 years of my life finally had nothing to say. He sat the way a building settles. Slow, heavy, the weight redistributing until the frame finds a new shape. His hands went to the table, palms down, fingers spread like he was checking to make sure the surface was still solid. And he looked at me, not down at me, not past me, at me, level, eye to eye. I'd waited a long time for that angle. He started to speak. Why didn't you? Then he stopped, his mouth closed. His eyes moved to the phone in my pocket, to the walls of the apartment, to the ceiling, as if he were seeing them for the first time, which in a way he was. Judith was crying, not the loud kind. No sob, no sound, just tears running down her face, dripping off her chin onto the dish towel still clutched in her hands. She wasn't crying because Harold had humiliated me. She was crying because she'd just realized something she couldn't take back. She'd spent 35 years nodding at the wrong daughter. The water in the kitchen was still running. Nobody moved to turn it off, and it hissed against the stainless steel sink like static on a dead channel. Uncle Gene finally spoke. Quiet, the voice of a man who'd been holding the same sentence for an hour. That's enough, Harold. Harold didn't argue. He didn't snap back. He just looked at his hands flat on the table, and I watched him turn them over, palms up like they belonged to someone else. Let me tell you how to recognize a man whose world just collapsed. He doesn't scream. He doesn't cry. He sits down, and he looks at his hands like they belong to someone else. I put on my coat, not because I was running, because I was finished. I picked up the empty casserole dish, the one Judith had scraped clean before the dinner went sideways. Grandma's recipe, brown butter and pecans. Even tonight they'd eaten every bite. I didn't address Harold. I spoke to the table, to all of them. I'm not angry. I stopped being angry a long time ago, but I'm done being the person this family needs to feel better about itself. Paige looked away. Brett looked at his empty glass. Derrick squeezed his wife's hand. I turned to Harold, kept my voice, even the same tone I used on calls with contractors and county inspectors. Your lease runs through April. Nothing changes. Same rent, same terms. Sterling handles everything the way they always have. I paused, but this is the last Thanksgiving I come to as someone you get to look down on. Then I turned to Judith. She was standing in the kitchen doorway crying into a dish towel that was already soaked. Mom, you're welcome to call me anytime, but the next time Dad says something like what he said tonight, and I need you to decide whether nodding is worth losing me. I kissed Aunt Ruth on the cheek. She squeezed my wrist, firm, warm, the grip of a woman who wanted to say 10 things and settled for one. Proud of you, she whispered. 2 words enough. I walked out of Unit 4B down the hallway of my own building. My heels clicked on the tile, sharp, even deliberate, past the mailboxes, past the lobby door that stuck in the cold, out into the November night, where the air tasted like frozen leaves and chimney smoke. The quietest person at the table isn't always the weakest. Sometimes she's just the one who owns the building. I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Light. I drove home through a town that was for once quieter than my family. The streets were empty. Every house glowing from Thaneside, warm squares of yellow light behind closed curtains, Thanksgiving tables still full, families still talking, dishes still warm. Mine was over. I called Marcus from the car, hands-free, voice steady mostly. It happened, I said. It finally happened. How do you feel? I thought about it. Really thought. The stoplight ahead turned red and I watched it bleed across the wet pavement. November cold had settled into everything. The steering wheel, the rear view mirror, the air in my lungs. Like I just put down something very heavy. Marcus didn't push. That's why I loved him. He left silence the way good architects leave space on purpose so the thing next to it can breathe. I crossed the bridge on Linen Avenue. Below the river was black and still. The streetlights reflecting in long wobbling lines like candle flames laid on their sides. I rolled the window down an inch. The air smelled like river mud and old ice. Somewhere between the bridge and my street, a memory surfaced, sharp, uninvited, 8 years old, sitting on the living room floor with a box of crayons, drawing a picture for Harold. A house, big roof, red door, 3 windows. I gave it to him after dinner. Proud the way only an 8-year-old can be proud. He glanced at it. Houses cost money, kid. I kept that drawing. It's in the top drawer of my desk, folded into quarters. The crayon faded to pastels, 30 years, Marcus asked if I was okay. I told him I was, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't lying. Paige called me 3 times that night. I know because I watched every single one go to voicemail. I was home by then. Condo quiet, kitchen clean, espresso machine still warm from that morning. I sat on the couch with the phone on the coffee table, screen up, and I watched it ring. First call 9:14 p.m. voicemail. Enid, we need to talk about what happened tonight. Call me back. Her voice was controlled. The customer service version of Paige, polished professional. The voice she used at open houses. Second call, 9:38 p.m. voicemail. You humiliated Dad on purpose at Thanksgiving in front of everyone. Do you understand what you did? The Polish was cracking underneath it. Something sharper. Third call, 10:11 p.m. voicemail. Call me back, this isn't over. 5 words, no polish left. I listened to all 3, one after another in the dark of my living room. The neighbor's porch light came through my window in a thin stripe across the ceiling. Outside, a dog barked once, then stopped. I set the phone down and went to the kitchen, made a cup of chamomile tea, stood at the counter, and drank it in slow sips while the kettle cooled. Paige wasn't calling to apologize. Paige wasn't calling to understand. Paige was calling to manage the narrative, to get her version of the story out before mine could take root. She wanted to frame it as Enid humiliated Dad instead of what it actually was. Dad humiliated himself and Enid let him. In my experience, the first person to call after a family blow-up isn't the one who cares the most. It's the one who has the most to lose. She wasn't calling to apologize. She was calling to write the story before I could. Too late. Aunt Ruth didn't call to manage the narrative. She called because she'd been waiting 20 years for someone to finally say what she couldn't. Friday afternoon. I was at my desk reviewing a maintenance request for the Orchard Lane property leaking dishwasher in 3B when my phone buzzed. Ruth's name. I picked up before the second ring. Enid Honey. Her voice was warm the way old quilts are warm. Soft, worn, familiar. A retired school teacher's voice, patient as a long afternoon. I just want you to know I saw. I've always seen. I set my pen down. I know you have, Aunt Ruth. She told me what happened after I left. Harold didn't move for 40 minutes, just sat at the head of the table, hands on the wood, staring at the turkey carcass like it held the answer to something. Judith cleared the entire table by herself. Every plate, every glass, every serving dish, and she didn't speak, she just cleaned. Paige and Brett got into it in the parking lot. Ruth could hear them through the guest room window. Paige's voice high and brittle, Brett's low and flat. The cousins left early. Tyler's girlfriend kept saying, "Should we go? I think we should go." "Your father didn't sleep last night," Ruth said. "Jean and I were in the guest room. I heard him packing back and forth, 2 in the morning. Does he know what he did wrong?" Ruth paused. The phone line hummed with the kind of silence that has weight. "He knows he lost. I'm not sure he knows what." Before she hung up, Ruth said one more thing. "Your grandmother would have loved this, you know." I smiled because Grandma was the one who taught me that the best investment is the one nobody sees coming. I saw, sweetheart, and I've always seen. And I'm sorry I never said it louder. Ladies, if you've ever watched a man realize he's been wrong about you for 20 years, that pause, that silence, that is the most expensive silence in the world. 3 days later, my father called, not to apologize, to investigate. I was in my kitchen, morning coffee, laptop open. The phone rang and I saw his name and I let it ring 3 times before I picked up, not to make a point to study myself. Enid. His voice was different, smaller. The bass was still there, but the authority had leaked out of it like air from a tire with a slow puncture. 5 seconds of silence. I counted them. "Did your grandmother leave you money?" Of all textions he could have asked, and he chose the one that assumed I couldn't have done it alone again. "No, Dad, I earned it." "How?" So I told him short version duplex at 25 for fourplex at 27 6-unit at 38 unit at 32 FHA loans house. Hacking reinvested profits 13 years. I gave him the timeline the way you'd give a stranger directions, clear, flat, no emotion. He was quiet for maybe the first time in my life. Harold Everett listened without interrupting. I could hear him breathing through his nose the way he breathed. when he was reading something he didn't want to admit was right. Then you should have told me. I could have helped. Helped how, Dad? The way you helped Paige with $120,000 and a pat on the back. The line went silent, then click. He hung up, sharp, final like a pair of scissors closing. He hung up. And I realized Harold wasn't angry that I was successful. He was angry that I was successful without him. My mother showed up with soup. That's how Judith Everett says I'm sorry without ever actually saying it. The following week, a Tuesday afternoon, the buzzer rang. I checked the camera. Judith standing on my porch with a Tupperware container and the expression of a woman who had rehearsed this moment in her car for 20 minutes. I opened the door. I made too much, she said, holding out the container. Turkey soup, the Thanksgiving leftovers reincarnated. Carrots, celery, the last of the bird pulled from the bone. Come in, Mom. She stepped inside. I watched her eyes move around the condo, the bookshelves, the granite counter, the west-facing window where the afternoon light pulled on the hardwood floor, and she touched the back of a dining chair, ran her fingers along the wood. It was the first time she'd been here. 6 years I'd lived in this condo. First visit. This is yours, she asked. It's been mine for 6 years, Mom. She sat at my kitchen table. I heated the soup. Steam rose between us, and for a moment my kitchen smelled exactly like her kitchen when I was 12 turkey bones and bay leaves, and something underneath that I could never name. Something that only existed in her cooking and nowhere else. I should have asked, Judith said, looking into her bowl. I should have come here sooner. She didn't apologize. She didn't say I was wrong or I should have protected you. She said I should have asked. And somehow that was both not enough and more than I'd ever gotten. I poured her coffee. We sat in the afternoon light drinking from mugs that didn't match and talked about nothing important. The weather, a recipe, the neighbor's dog. She didn't apologize. She said, I should have asked. And somehow that was both not enough and more than I'd ever gotten. 2 weeks later, Paige's empire, all 3 stories of it, began to collapse. The family found out through the usual channels. Aunt Ruth heard from Uncle Gene, who heard from a neighbor on Elm Street that a for sale short sale sign had gone up in the yard of Paige's second property. The bank was involved. The listing price was $30,000 below what she'd paid. Brett had moved into a friend's spare bedroom. He'd filed for separation the Monday after Thanksgiving. Paige called it a break. Brett's lawyer called it something else. Harold said nothing, not publicly anyway. The scaffolding he'd built around Paige, 35 years of favoritism, $120,000 of seed money, 1,000 dinner conversations where she was held up as proof that he'd raised at least one winner. All of it was buckling under thwait of 3 adjustable-rate mortgages and a marriage that couldn't survive the truth. One night, scrolling through my phone before bed, I saw it. Paige's Facebook post time-stamped 11:47 p.m. The blue light of the screen reflected on my face in the dark. God's plan is bigger than our plans. Sometimes life takes us apart so it can put us back together in a way we never expected. Grateful for the journey, I stared at it for 5 seconds. The first snowflakes of December drifted past my window. Small, dry, the kind that don't stick. I closed the laptop, set it on the nightstand, turned off the lamp. In my experience, the people who talk the most about God's plan are the ones least prepared for it. Paige posted that God had a bigger plan. God's plan, as far as I could tell, involved a short sale and a marriage counselor. The letter arrived in December. No return address, but I knew the handwriting. My father writes like a man trying to build something with the wrong hand. Harold was left-handed. His cursive leaned hard to the right. The letters crowded and angular like they were trying to outrun each other. The paper was plain white, the kind you buy in a room from the office supply store. The envelope had been sealed, torn open, resealed with tape, and sealed again. He'd written this more than once. I found it in the Burwood Property Group mailbox, not the one at my condo, the one at the LLC's registered address. He'd tracked it down. I don't know how. Maybe he Googled. Maybe he went to the county recorder's office and pulled the business filings. Either way, he'd done something Harold almost never does. Research he didn't want to do. I opened it standing in the lobby. 4 sentences written in ballpoint pen. Enid, the lobby door still sticks. You should fix it, Dad. That was it. No apology. No, I'm proud of you. No, I was wrong. Just a complaint about a sticky door addressed to the person who owns the building. But here's the thing. And if you've been with me this long, you already see it. He wrote to me as the landlord. He acknowledged it, not in words, in the act of writing. I folded the letter along its original creases, carried it home, opened my desk drawer and placed it inside, right next to the crayon drawing of a house I'd made when I was 8 years old. Red door, 3 windows, big roof. He didn't apologize. He complained about the lobby door, and I put his letter in the same drawer where I kept the house I drew for him when I was 8. One more thing happened before the year ended, and it changed everything. That Christmas, I set a table for 4, not 14. 4. Aunt Ruth and Uncle Gene arrived at 6 with a bottle of wine that cost more than Gene usually spent on anything. His way of saying this mattered. Ruth wore the red scarf she only wore on holidays and carried a pie she admitted was store-bought. Life's too short to crimp dough, she said, and set it on the counter next to my casserole. We ate in me dining room, the one with the west-facing window and the bookshelves and the good light. I put up a small tree in the corner, a Fraser fir that smelled like cold mountain air and pine resin. Ruth hummed, Silent Night, while she helped plate the food. Gene poured the wine and said, Grace, short, sincere, the way he always did it. No Ridgemont dining table crammed into a space that couldn't hold it. No fluorescent lights, no herald at the head. After dinner, while Gene dozed on the couch, Ruth leaned across the table and said, Your grandmother left you something better than money, you know. She left you her spine. I laughed, actually laughed. The kind that starts in your stomach and pushes upward until your eyes water. Judith had called that morning. You're not coming. Not this year, Mom, but you're welcome here. Silence on the line. The kind of silence that trembles at the edges like a leaf about to fall. Then maybe next time. Maybe next time. It was the first honest thing she'd said to me in years. Not a promise, not a deflection, an admission that next time existed and that she'd have to earn it. My mother said, maybe next time. And I thought that's the first honest thing she said to me in years. Candles on the table, wine in the glasses, 4 chairs all filled. Enough. If there is one thing I've learned, it's this. You don't owe anyone a tour of your life just because they share your last name. In January, I fixed the lobby-door. It had been sticking for 2 years, but it wasn't the door that needed fixing. I called the contractor myself. Not through Sterling, not through the app. I showed up at the building on a Saturday morning, 8:00 a.m., coffee in hand, and stood in the lobby while a man named Ray pulled the pins from the hinges and rehung the door with new hardware. The lobby smelled like metal shavings and machine oil. While Ray worked, I walked the hallway. 12 mailboxes, each one labeled with a last name in block letters. Martinez, Kowalski, Henderson, Everett. 12 families coming home every night to a roof. I maintained a furnace. I serviced a parking lot. I ran my knuckles along the wall as I walked solid the elevator, dinged the doors, opened Harold. Stepped out, he was wearing his old Carhartt jacket, the brown one from the construction days, frayed at the cuffs. He had a bag of groceries under one arm, and he stopped when he saw me. We stood there 5 feet apart, the contractor's drill word behind me. The door, Harold said. I know it's being fixed. He nodded, looked at the contractor, then at the fresh hinges, then back at me. His jaw moved the way it does when he's chewing on something that isn't food. Good building, he said. Quiet, almost a whisper. 2 words, that's all. From anyone else, they'd mean nothing. From Harold Everett. From the man who'd never once told me he was proud, never once acknowledged that I'd built anything worth acknowledging. Good building was a standing ovation. I nodded back and forth. First time the nod was mine, not my mother's. Some mornings I open my laptop and I don't close it. That still feels new. January light came through the bedroom curtains, pale blue-white and the color of skimmed milk. I sat at my kitchen table with coffee, the steam curling upward in slow spirals, and opened the spreadsheet. December's numbers, all 4 buildings, all 24 units. I didn't close the screen. didn't minimize the window when Marcus walked in. He poured himself a cup, kissed the top of my head, and said, "Good month. Every month's a good month when nobody's yelling at you," I said. He laughed. I laughed. The sparrows outside the window called 3 times, bright, sharp, insistent, and then went quiet. I thought about the drawing. The crayon house with the red door and the big roof tucked into a desk drawer next to a handwritten letter about a lobby door. An 8-year-old girl who wanted to build a house. A 38-year-old woman who owned 4 buildings. And the girl drew the house for her father. The woman built them for herself. I don't hate Harold, I did for a while. The hot kind of anger that keeps you up at 3:00 a.m. rewriting conversations you'll never have. But anger is a tenant that doesn't pay rent. And I evicted it a long time ago. What I feel now is something smaller. Pity, maybe, soft around the edges. Harold spent 64 years measuring everything with the wrong ruler. And now the ruler is broken and he can't find a new one. That's not my problem to fix, but I can see it for what it is. The girl who drew a house at 8 grew up to own the building. But that's not the ending. The ending is simpler than that. I loved my father the way you love a house with a cracked foundation. Carefully and always knowing when to walk out the door. A week later and I went back to the building. Routine inspection. Roof, boiler, fire extinguishers, the kind of walkthrough I do every quarter. Clipboard in hand. Sterling's maintenance guy 2 steps behind me. We started on the top floor and worked our way down. Checked the stairwell lights. Tested the smoke detectors. Noted a hairline crack in the 3rd floor hallway wall. Cosmetic, not structural. I wrote it down. On the 1st floor, I walked past Unit 4B. The door was closed. From inside, I could hear the faint sound of a television. Local news, weather forecast, the anchor's voice steady and familiar. The smell of coffee drifted under the door. Judith's coffee. She always made it too strong. I didn't knock. I didn't need to. Downstairs, the lobby door opened with a quiet, smooth swing. No sticking, no grinding, no fighting. Ray had done good work. Cold January air washed in, clean and sharp, tasting of snow that hadn't fallen yet, carrying the mineral smell of frozen concrete. I stepped out. The sunlight hit my face, low and bright. The kind of winter sun that doesn't warm you, but makes everything look brand new. My building stood behind me, solid, square, its shadow stretching long across the parking lot. I don't know if my father will ever say he's proud of me, but I know this. I am proud of me. And I built something that doesn't need anyone else's approval to stand. There's nothing louder than a man who just found out he's been paying rent to his own daughter. And there's nothing quieter than a woman who already knew. Thank you for sitting with me today. If this story reminded you of your own, tell me in the comments. I read everyone. Subscribe if you haven't. Share this with someone who needs it. You've got a seat here in a time. Come back next time. I'll have coffee ready. And trust me, the next story, it's even.